Reach Young Adult Ministry Sermons online from Tuesday, March 31st, 2020 by Philip Jackson, pastor of Young Adults at Evergreen Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, entitled Transformations in the Wilderness, Moses and the Burning Bush from Exodus 3 and 4.
All right, if you got your Bibles, got your phones, turn over to Exodus chapter 3. So, little background. You guys know the story of Moses. Many of you do, but a quick recap. So this is the first of 4 lessons about transformations in the wilderness. And here's what's crazy about this whole thing is that I sat down in December and I laid out for the first 4 or 5 months of sermons and lessons for Reach. And as I was praying through that, the theme of transformation came up, and I started feeling that God wanted us to focus specifically on this, about how God changes us over time throughout our life to be something that is different than where we started. So He saves us, He cleanses us, and that is salvation. But the process of us becoming more like Jesus is called sanctification. So this is a lifelong pursuit. And so for us, it can be easy to be frustrated by a lack of transformation, especially whenever we first come to know Jesus. Or, for instance, another case would be if you grew up in the church and you've experienced all of this church culture, you've experienced all of these God things, you know how to talk the language, you know when to stand up, when to sit down, when to sing, when not to sing, when to pray. You can do this stuff in your sleep. But at your core, though, there's a challenge because you don't feel like you're different than anybody else. And as far as this being the living truth, it is really difficult at times when you have been living this your whole life to look back and see, now wait a minute, I've just been doing this since I was in grade school. I walked the aisle when I was 7 or 8 years old. I got baptized by my pastor. I went to Bible school. I went to church camp, all these things. But it gets really difficult to see change over our lifetime, because not everybody has a testimony like Roya or like others that came to know Jesus later in life after trying so hard to do it their own way. And so it can be frustrating for those of us who have grown up in the church to think, oh, well, I don't have a story like that. But one of the things that I think is incredible here is that as I've been looking at this series of transformations in the wilderness, I want you to think about this, that major characters, major people that God has used in history, the wilderness has been a significant part of their life. Okay, so if you think about it in the context of where we are today, the wilderness is a place of solitude. It is a place of loneliness. It is a place of frustration. It is a place that is untamed. There's not people there. There's no distractions there. It is a quiet, solitudinal place. And so when you think about these people, we're going to look specifically at Moses tonight, but we're going to look at John the Baptist, we're going to look at Jesus, and we're going to look at Elijah, and how God uses these moments in the wilderness to transform them into something else. And one thing is absolutely true, that consistently across the board in the Bible, when you read these accounts of people going into the wilderness, they go in one way, they meet God in solitude, and they are transformed, and when they come out, they are something different. But when they come out, they are not sure of themselves. And so there is a season of life that they go through where God confirms His calling on them. And so Moses is the first stepping stone that we're going to look at. And so over the next 4 weeks, what we're going to do is we're going to study what it means to be transformed in the wilderness. And where this fits with us right now is this whole coronavirus thing, where all of us are sitting in our homes. We can't go anywhere. We can't even go to Walmart without people freaking out and wearing masks and rubber gloves. And you can't go anywhere without being squirted with hand sanitizer because everybody is terrified that they're going to get something. We are living in the wilderness. But here's the beautiful part, is that for those of us who are in Jesus, who are Christians, who follow Christ, the wilderness is our home. Because consistently from the beginning, people of God have been people of the wilderness. We are children of the wilderness. And so when the world wants to sort itself out, the world goes to ways to distract itself from problems. We've talked about this before. That the world's reaction to stress and to difficulty is to find any kind of distraction possible, whether it is alcohol or sex or addiction or work or knowledge or pride, or that the world tries to soften itself from the realities of how difficult life is. But a Christian, someone who follows Jesus, understands that the problem is not out there, the problem is in here. And so where we go to find solutions is the exact opposite of where the world goes. We go to the wilderness. We go to a solitary place. We go somewhere where we can be alone with God and we can do business and deal with the issues that are happening in our lives. Okay, so the wilderness for us is not a strange place. For the world it is. See, the world is freaking out right now because everybody's at home. Everybody is by themselves. But to those who are following Jesus, the wilderness is a place where we can actually find confidence. Because God, over the course of history, that is what he does, is he takes regular, ordinary people and he turns them into children of the wilderness. And in the wilderness, he gives them a divine calling. So consider this about the story of Moses. Okay? I'll give you a little recap before we get into the story for this morning, or for this evening. The first thing is that, so you guys remember Joseph, right? Joseph with his Technicolor dream coat, right? He goes to Egypt as a slave. And there's a famine. His family follows him down to Egypt, and they end up planting themselves under the Pharaoh, and Joseph was the second in charge in Egypt. Well, as the Egyptian empire grew, the people of Israel grew, and they kept reproducing exponentially. And so much so that the Egyptians started to be afraid of the Jews, because they were afraid that if the Jews came into an alliance with another foreign power that were going to challenge the Egyptians, that somehow they would have an enemy army in their backyard. And so they began to press in on the Jews and began to do everything they could to try to tamp down their population. And so what they did is they started to persecute the Jews as they multiplied. But the challenge is that in Exodus chapter 2, it says that the more that Pharaoh pushed down on the Israelites, the more they multiplied. And so he began to get more and more frustrated. And so they began to crack the whip, literally, and put them into slavery. And then eventually it came to the point to where he said, we've got to control their population. And so he commanded the Hebrew midwives to kill every male that was born over a generation. Well, the midwives were accountable to God because they were Jews themselves, and so they refused his order. And but in the process of that, there's a boy that's born to a Levite couple, a man and a woman. And this boy is hidden by his mother for 3 months. She nurses him, and then when he finally gets to the place where he's too big for her to hide, she puts him in a basket of papyrus, and she covers it with tar, and she puts him in the reeds right on the Nile River, where the royalty were known to come and bathe regularly, hoping that he might be picked up by a well-to-do woman that could take care of him and raise him. She wouldn't have to put him in harm's way. Well, sure enough, that happens. His big sister is just watching what's happening from a distance. And you can imagine in your sanctified imagination, this little girl is watching her baby brother in a basket in the reeds on the Nile River. And the princess, the daughter of Pharaoh, comes and she bathes in the river. And while she's bathing in the river, on her way out, she notices this basket. And so she picks up this basket and she notices that it's a Hebrew boy. So long story short, his sister runs to the princess and she says, hey, do you need someone to nurse this baby? Because it clearly hasn't been weaned. She says, absolutely. Would you go find me a Jewish nursemaid to take care of this baby? So Miriam, the older sister of Moses, goes and gets her mother, and she's reunited, and the princess asks her to raise this boy to be her son. And so Moses grows up in the palace. He grows up to be educated in the law. He gets tutored by the finest tutors in the land. And he begins to blossom, and he gets a royal education. So when the time comes, though, when he's a grown man, he decides that he's going to go and he's going to visit the people of Israel. He's going to go visit his people. And so he goes out to walk through the slave camps, and he sees an Egyptian beating up a Hebrew. And in a fit of rage, he protects the Hebrew, and he kills the Egyptian. Well, naturally, there's consequences, and so Moses runs for his life because he realizes that when Pharaoh found out that he was going to put him to death. So Moses flees to the land of Midian, which is just across the border. And there he finds a woman, he gets married, he gets settled in and starts a family. So fast forward about 40 years later, Moses is an old man. He's 80 years old. He's a shepherd. He's been a shepherd for 4 decades now. And he takes his sheep out to the wilderness to graze. And in that place, in that context, his life changes forever. So the first thing that I want you to see, though, is we're going to start in Exodus 3. We're going to read the first 5 verses, and then we're going to talk about it real quick. Okay, so the first thing I want you to see in this passage is that the wilderness is a holy place. Okay, the wilderness is a holy place. Aaron, does that work if you try to turn the slides on? Okay, check this out. Verse 1 of chapter 3, it says, "Meanwhile, Moses was shepherding the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire within a bush. As Moses looked, he saw that the bush was on fire but not consumed. So Moses thought, 'I must go over and look at this remarkable sight. Why isn't this bush burning up?' When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called out to him from the bush, 'Moses, Moses.' 'Here I am,' he answered. 'Do not come closer,' he said. 'Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy ground.'" Okay, so here's the first thing I want you to notice here, is that without God, the wilderness is a desolate place. Okay, the wilderness is a place where nothing lives. But when God is present, all of a sudden, regular ground, a regular place turns into a holy place. Okay, God, He makes a habit of taking ordinary, regular things and turning them into supernatural, holy things. God takes our regular, everyday lives and He supernaturally changes them. He's present in our lives and He wants our attention. But here's the thing, is that sometimes we're walking along and we see these burning bushes, we see these events. In the middle of our humdrum lives where we are doing our thing, we're going to work, we're going to school, we're earning a paycheck, we're going towards the next goal, we're working on the next checkbox to go after. And God plants Himself beside where we are. The temptation sometimes, though, is to focus on where we are and not to see the supernatural things that God is doing. See, God wants us to know that He wants to be intricately involved in our lives, right? We've been talking about this is the year of transformation for us, right? So we're in the process of learning what that looks like. In Romans 12, remember it says there's a simple process for seeing this evidence, this supernatural power in our life and knowing God's will, and it begins with sacrifice. It begins with understanding that I have to give up something in order for God to do something in my life. Because as long as I hold on to my pride, as long as I hold on to the things that I want, what that means is that I'm not paying attention to what God wants. So Moses, as he's walking along, he stops for a minute. He goes, "Whoa, wait a minute. That bush over there is on fire. That's weird. That's really odd. That's different." So for us, when we are doing our regular thing and we're in our regular life, and something supernatural happens, something that is out of the ordinary happens, we should not be surprised, because these should be the markers in our life that we look to. We bounce from one to the next. We start waiting with holy anticipation for God to do something in our lives. We're waiting for the next burning bush. We can't wait for the next burning bush, because this isn't a place of terror. This isn't a place where we are afraid. We understand that when we are in the wilderness, this is where God shows up. And when God shows up, the ordinary parts of our life turn into supernatural parts of our life. And He takes all of these small little things and He creates something that is supernatural, and it can't be explained. See, for many of us, we see the wilderness as a desolate place filled with death, right? But in reality, it's the place where God shows up by stripping us of all the distractions society puts in front of us. What the world wants us to see is that the wilderness is useless. But God uses it for divine guidance and teaching. A mature disciple of Christ knows that God is found in the wilderness, and that for us, it's a place that we run to because God is there. If there's one defining characteristic of a godly transformed life, it's that we are children of the wilderness. We crave it because God is there, right? When you're going through these moments, right? Are you thinking with anticipation, with excited anticipation, God, I can't wait until the next quarantine? God, I cannot wait until I don't get that job. I cannot wait until I don't finish school. I can't wait until I'm stuck in a place. I want you to think about this. Let this change your way of thinking. That the wilderness is a place where one thing is true. God is present. And what the world looks at with distress, they pull out their hair and they're frustrated. The truth is that for a mature believer in Jesus, we understand that these are the moments that are the most profound in our lives. These are the moments that when we look at this, when we look back, we think, oh my goodness, I cannot believe that God let me see that. That God let me experience that moment, because at the moment, it really was not fun. Let's be honest, it sucked. But the truth is that these are the moments, though, when God profoundly impacts our life. He injects himself into what's going on with us. And the thing about it is that if we have all of this other junk in our lives that's getting in the way of us being able to see the truth, God has a way of clearing the field. See, we're in an unprecedented time. Unprecedented time, right? God has chosen us to live these days, to go through this epidemic, this crisis together. That means that of all the people that have ever lived, of all the people in all the nations and all the states and all the cities, God chose for us to live right here, right now, at this moment. That means that God has intentionally placed each and every one of us in this situation for a specific purpose. I love what Harry always says, that God's made you on purpose for a purpose. It is so true, but specifically within the context of this moment here, with this coronavirus situation, God has chosen you to live these days in this context for a specific reason. So the wilderness is not a place of death and destruction, of no progress. The wilderness is a place that is holy. It is a place where, for someone who is watching and can see, God is ready to move. But he continues on. Okay, look at this. God also, he gives purpose in the wilderness. So Moses, you got to remember, this guy he knows he's a Jew. He knows that he's been cast out of Egypt. He knows that he has lost a comfortable life. He could have lived in the palace and had all the food that he wanted. He could have been anything that he wanted to be. And he knows that he's lost that. So here he is herding sheep for 40 years. And so you know that in these quiet moments, he had thoughts in his head, thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't have killed that Egyptian? What would my life be? I wouldn't be out here kicking rocks and feeding sheep. But God, he uses the wilderness as a place to establish purpose. Look at what he says next in verses 6 through 12. He continues on, it says, Then he continued, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them cry out because of their oppressors. I know about their sufferings, and I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and to bring them from that land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the territory of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. So because the Israelite cry for help has come to me, and I have also seen the way of the Egyptians are oppressing them. Therefore go, I am sending you to Pharaoh, so that you may lead my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses asked God, Who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh, and that I should bring the Israelites out of Egypt? He answered, I will certainly be with you, and this will be the sign to you, that I am the one who sent you. When you bring the people out of Egypt, you will all worship God at this mountain. Okay, so check this out. Moses was a fugitive, right? Moses was running for his life. He's thinking, if I go back to Egypt, they could string me up. This is really dangerous for him. He's thinking, wait, I can't go back there. You don't understand. Who am I to go back and talk to Pharaoh? But consider this, right? At this point in history, Moses is the only Hebrew with experience in the royal palace. He's the only one with diplomatic experience. He's the only one that knows the royal family. He's the only one that even in his name, he was named after an Egyptian god. See, as I was studying this, what was interesting is that Moses' name actually in Egyptian is Thutmose. In Hebrew, it's Moses, but in Egyptian, it's Thutmose. And it's the compilation of two things. One is Thut is a verb that means to bring forth. Okay, and then Mos was a god. He was a divine being, and so Moses, in and of himself, was named by his Egyptian mother, his adopted mother, after a Egyptian god. Now here's why this is significant. Okay, is that Thutmose means the one who brings forth. Another way you could translate that is the one who brings out. Moses, when he was a child, was named by a pagan woman as the one who would bring the people of Israel out. So consider this, is that God starts here. He says, listen, I know where you've been. But God begins by reminding Moses of his heritage and the relationships that he has had with his forefathers. Okay, so look at this, what he says in verse 6. He says, then he continued, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. See, here's the thing about this, is that God doesn't acknowledge the mistakes that Moses has made. He doesn't acknowledge his past. He doesn't acknowledge all the mistakes that he's done. He says, look, here's the brass tacks. Here's the foundation of this thing. I made a promise with these people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, your forefathers. And what he's saying there is he's saying, I know exactly who you are. Honestly, this is really cheesy, but the thing that this reminds me of is when in The Lion King, when Simba is like trying to figure out if he should go back to the Pride Land, and Rafiki, the baboon, he tells him, right? Thank you. He tells him, remember who, and he has this vision with his dad, remember who you are, right? That was kind of what I thought of when I read this. That if you consider this, right? So I know this is super cheesy, right? But God is telling Moses, now remember, listen, remember who you are, remember who you come from. This whole Egyptian thing, this side of you that you're holding on to, the thing that you kick around in your mind all the time when you're out here tending to sheep, that's the smallest part of you. The biggest part of you is that you are a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These are men that I love. These are men that I made a promise to. And you're the one that I've chosen to fulfill that promise. See, what Moses doesn't realize is that his wilderness is another person's answer to prayer. See, when we're going through this, hold on, look, check this out. This is big. Okay, so in verse 7, listen to what God says. He says, after he reminds him who he was, right? He says in verse 7, he says, then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people in Egypt, and I have heard them cry out because of their oppressors. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians, to bring them from that land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. He says, in verse 9, he says, because of the Israelites' cry for help, that because that has come to me, and I've also seen the way of the Egyptians who are oppressing them, therefore go, I am sending you to Pharaoh, so that you may lead my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. See, what Moses doesn't realize is that his moment in the wilderness is actually someone else's answer to prayer. See, when we're going through stuff like this, when we're going through coronavirus quarantine or whatever the case may be, we're stuck in that position where we don't have a job anymore. Or maybe we are, our hours have been cut, or maybe we have loved ones who are about to die, or we feel like we're stuck. What we can't forget is that it's not about us. It's not all about us. It's that God has created this moment. It's more comprehensive than just that. Right? This is something that is so much bigger than just Moses. So he reassures him of who he is, but he tells him, hey, listen, I'm here because I heard the cry of my children in Egypt. He says, Moses, we're having this conversation because they called on me. He heard their cry. And so because of those things, he's having this conversation with Moses. Now, here's another thing too, is that we think that the things that we go through are just for us in this moment, but they're not. See, when we go through these wilderness moments, these transformational moments where we think that we're stuck, the truth is that these are markers for the future. Okay, these are points, these are data points in our lives that are going to point to a future event. So he says this small little phrase, about how they're going to worship at this mountain. Look at verse 12. It says, he answered, I will certainly be with you, and this will be the sign to you that I am the one who sent you. When you bring the people of Egypt, you will all worship God at this mountain. So the Mount Horeb, okay? Mount Horeb is also known as Mount Sinai. This is the exact same place, years later, that Moses will bring down the Ten Commandments to the people of Israel. This is the exact spot where God literally lays the law out for Moses to his people, that lays the foundation for what we would look for Jesus. So this conversation that's happening in front of this burning bush, this moment right here, points to something way farther in the future that Moses has no idea is going to be impacted by. See, when we're going through these things, when we're going through these wilderness moments, we think that, oh, well, this just really just sucks for me right now. I just need to get through it. I'm just going to kind of ignore it. I'm going to coast until it's over. But the truth is that we should be focusing intently on what God wants for us in these things. Because the truth is that we should be soaking this up. We should be thinking, oh my goodness, how can this promise help? Where does this promise fit? Where do these things go? Why do I have to search after God so hard in the desert? Because these are places of radical transformation. And so we got to think about how this is going to do something later on that we can't even explain. So Moses goes on. We're not going to read the rest of chapter 3. We're going to jump into chapter 4. But Moses goes on to ask God, how are they going to take me seriously? And God just tells him, you just tell them that I am sent you. He says, here's what's going to happen. God gives them the roadmap. And he says, you're going to go, you're going to talk to the elders, and you're going to tell them we're going to go talk to Pharaoh, and we're going to ask him to let us loose. And they say, okay, we're going to do that. And you're going to go to Pharaoh, and he's going to tell you no. And then I'm going to send plagues on Egypt. I'm going to do these miraculous things. And Moses says, okay, all right, well, sure, I guess we'll do that. But then God goes on to reassure him. See, when we experience God in the wilderness, right, it's easy to take the confidence that he gives us to hold on to it, right? So God is not going to give you a divine task and he's going to pull the rug out from underneath you. He's not going to do that. That's not what he does. Remember, as we abide in him, as we lay our lives down as living sacrifices, what happens is he transforms our mind, and in the process of that, we share in his glory. Remember, Romans says that we actually share in his glory as he unfolds what he's doing in the earth through us. We actually get to share in his glory. So God's not going to leave you unequipped for what he calls you to do. He's going to give you a purpose, he's going to give you a task, and he's going to give you the power to complete it. See, we can't deny our church family the rich truth of our time in the wilderness, our giftedness. We can't ignore it and hoard it for ourselves, never sharing it with others. These moments are meant to be breathed into the life of other people. So you may be thinking, oh, well, I'm at home, I'm just going to do my thing by myself. But the truth is that what God is doing in you right now is meant to be shared, right? This community that we're in right now, as frustrating as it is, as weird as it is to call into a Zoom and sit there in front of your laptop or in front of your phone and listen to me teach with my laptop over here, and it doesn't feel the same. But the truth is that when God takes us through these things, he means for us to share it with people. See, remember, Moses' experience wasn't just for Moses. It was meant to be the catalyst for setting up the people of Israel to be free. When God gives us a calling, we're not allowed to keep it to ourselves. We have to share it with other people. Right? It's something that it boils up inside of us. But Moses, he's still unsure of himself. He's not sure if he's really the right man for the job. And so he asks God for a little bit of reassurance. So check out chapter 4. The third thing I want you to see here is that the wilderness is a place of confidence. It is a place of confidence. Okay, chapter 4 begins this way. Moses answered, if they won't believe me and will not obey me, but say, the Lord did not appear to you. The Lord asked him, what is in your hand? A staff, he replied. Throw it on the ground, he said. So Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. The Lord told Moses, stretch out your hand and grab it by the tail. So he stretched out his hand and he caught it, and it became a staff in his hand. This will take place, he continued, so that they will believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. In addition, the Lord said to him, "Put your hand inside your cloak." So he put his hand inside of his cloak, and when he took it out, his hand was diseased, resembling snow. In other words, he has leprosy on his hands. "Put your hand back inside your cloak," he said. So he put his hand back inside his cloak, and when he took it out, it had again become like the rest of his skin. If they will not believe you and will not respond to the evidence of the first sign, they may believe the evidence of the second sign. And if they don't believe even the two signs or listen to what you say, take some water from the Nile and pour it out on the dry ground. The water will take from the Nile and will become blood on the ground. But Moses replied to the Lord, "Please, Lord, I have never been eloquent, either in the past or recently or since you have been speaking to your servant, because my mouth and my tongue are sluggish." He says he's got a stutter. Verse 11, the Lord said to him, "Who placed the mouth on humans? Who makes a person mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak, and will teach you what to say." And Moses is just not having it. Look at this, verse 13. He says, Moses said, "Please, Lord, send someone else." Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "Isn't Aaron the Levite your brother? I know that he can speak well, and he is on his way now to meet you. He will rejoice when he sees you. You will speak with him and tell him what to say. I will help both of you and speak to him and will teach you both what to do. He will speak to the people for you. He will serve as a mouth for you, and will serve as God to him. And you will serve as God to him. And take this staff in your hand, and you will perform the signs with it." So here's the thing, is that Moses, right, he's got these questions. What if they don't believe me? What if they don't obey me? What if they don't follow me? What if they don't trust me? And God displays his power in small, just simple ways before he does it in big ways, right? So this is before we get to the locusts and the frogs and the Nile turning to blood and all of the boils and the fire from heaven. These are small little things. These are like previews that God gives Moses. Like, hey, listen, this is the kind of stuff that I'm going to do. Understand, though, that I'm not sending you alone. And I don't know about you guys, but every day, you guys know this about me, every day I have the thought that I'm not qualified to do my job. Every single day I don't feel qualified. Moses feels the same way. The truth is that for us who truly understand who we are, and we have a proper understanding of humility and the work that God is doing within us, we will understand that God is the one that's doing these things for us. And so there will naturally be a hesitancy about what God calls us to do, because we're going to think, well, wait a minute, I don't talk like that person. I don't sing like that person. I don't do that, or I'm not gifted that way, or I can't do those things. And that doesn't change the truth that God has called you to do something, right? We have one job, and that job is to be obedient. That job is to abide. That job is to do what God calls us to do. And so God, he reassures Moses in these ways, and he gives him all these little bitty things that he can hold on to. I can just imagine. I'm using my sanctified imagination, just thinking about Moses, right? In his mind, he's thinking, God is telling me I've got to go back to Egypt. Well, okay, he says that he's going to protect me, so I know I'm not going to get killed. But what if I show up and I say, hey, I'm a Jew and I'm here to save you because God sent me? Don't you think that there will be some people who would say, oh, wait a minute, I know you. You're that Jew that pretended to be an Egyptian that killed the Egyptian. He'll stand there in front of all these Jews who have been living in slavery for generations, for 400 years. And this guy who grew up in the palace is going to say, oh, hey, here, guys, I'm here for you. He's going to stand in front of all the holy men, the guys who have been pursuing God and disciplining themselves in godly things. And he's going to say that he is the prophet. I got to tell you, that would make me nervous. That would make me feel unqualified to be able to speak for God. But I love God's response. Whenever Moses says, oh, please, no, please send somebody else, God's not having any. In verse 11, he says, the Lord said to him, who placed the mouth in humans? Who makes a person mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, and I will help you speak, and I will teach I will teach you what to say. See, the thing about it is that God doesn't give us these callings and not give us the equipment to be able to do what he wants us to do. See, when we first start out in the wilderness, we have this mindset of, this sucks. This is just not fun. I hate that I'm here. I hate that I'm doing this. I'm really tired of living these days over and over again. I should be somewhere else on the trajectory, right? I shouldn't be living at home. I shouldn't be at this point in my career. I shouldn't be this point in my school. I should be, according to the trajectory, I should be somewhere else, wherever that magical place is where you're supposed to be on your trajectory. And you begin to think, oh, well, maybe God just forgot about me. But the truth is that God has placed you in the wilderness for a reason. He's waiting to show you something. He wants to take this ordinary, regular place, and he wants to teach you divine callings for your life. See, we have to remember that when God calls us to a task, we are not left to accomplish it on our own. Divine callings always come with divine power. God reminds Moses that he is the ultimate authority over all creation, right? I put mouths in human beings. I'm the one that loosed tongues, and I'm the one that binds tongues. I'm the one that puts the brain in your head. I'm the one that puts you together piece by piece. Remember Psalm 139. He did all this on purpose. You are exactly equipped for what God has called you to do exactly. At no point does God need us to accomplish his will. Never. He invites us to be a conduit for his power in miraculous work in the world. This is why the Apostle Paul encouraged us that we have not been given a spirit of fear, but one of power and of love and of a sound mind. Right? We should walk into these things confidently. So we know the story, right? So Moses, he goes back to Egypt, he walks in, he gets the support of the people, he walks into Pharaoh's chamber. Pharaoh says no. 10 plagues happen. And God promises Moses. He says, when you leave, the people of Egypt are going to shower my people with their treasure. And they are going to loot the nation of Egypt. I am going to do these things. And Moses continued. He took the people out of Egypt, all the miracles in the desert. And here's what I want you to think about. Remember where we started. Okay, where we started in the wilderness. Moses is an 80-year-old shepherd man, and he's leading his sheep around the wilderness. And he comes up to this mountain that he's been at who knows how many times, and he sees a burning bush, and his life changes. Fast forward to the end of his days. Okay, they've wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. He has faithfully led the people. He has sacrificed himself. He has lived, and he has done his very best. Listen to what God says about Moses when he dies, okay? So if you can pull up the screen with the notes on it. This is what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 34 about Moses. It says, "Then the Lord said to him, 'This is the land I promised on the oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you will not cross over into it.' And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. He buried him in Moab, in the valley opposite Beth Peor. But to this day no one knows where his grave is. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. The Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days, until the time of weeping and mourning was over. Now Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom, because Moses had laid his hand on him. So the Israelites listened to him and did what the Lord had commanded Moses. Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all those signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his officials and to his whole land. For no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all Israel." That's the culmination of his life. That he lived faithfully. This moment in the wilderness where he is walking his sheep and he sees this burning bush and he has this conversation with God, and God changes his life by saying, "I have created you for this moment. I have prepared you for this moment. Here's what's crazy for me. So a lot of you guys know the story of my last 6 months working for the U.S. House of Representatives, right? Member of Congress leaves, his staff is left behind. So when Jim Bridenstine left Congress to go take over at NASA, his staff, to go over to work at NASA, you have to have a presidential appointment. You've got to go through this massive vetting process. And so slowly but surely, our team started to leave and migrate over to the executive branch in NASA. And Jim had asked me if I wanted to go with him to Washington, D.C., and I told him that our life was here in Tulsa, and I didn't really feel like God wanted us to move. And so for 6 months, when a member of Congress leaves office and his staff is left behind, they go under what's called the administrative function of the chief administrator of the House. And so what that means basically is that you answer the phone when it rings, you answer emails when they're sent, but you don't do any other work at all. And so my job working for the House of Representatives was that my job was to be with people. I was a field representative, so I would represent him as his ambassador around the district. Well, when I don't have a member of Congress, you can't be anybody's ambassador. So I sat at my desk for 6 months. I sat there with nothing to do. There were no phone calls. There were no emails. There were no meetings. There was nothing. For 6 months, I sat there. And I cannot tell you how many times I asked God, why am I here? Why? This is so stupid. Like, I literally am watching Netflix all day. Like, I would download. This is my process. I'm not kidding you. I would, because it took so long to download shows and stuff, I would pick my episodes out the night before. It would download while I slept. And then I would take 7 or 8 episodes of whatever, either on Amazon Prime or on Netflix, to my office, which I didn't have Wi-Fi, because I couldn't connect to the government Wi-Fi on my phone. And I would sit there at my desk for 8 hours. Nothing to do. Literally zip. Nothing. That was great for the first week until I was pulling my hair out. I look back now and I'm like, okay, cool. Well, so I can't leave my office at my house. And I've got to do video conferencing with my people. Cool. Awesome. Well, we've kind of already been here. Here's what I want to encourage you in. Is that God has called us at this time, the coronavirus, the COVID-19, to be in the wilderness. Okay? And how you use these days will echo for the rest of your lives. You're going to look back on this moment. You're going to look back on these days, these weeks of frustration, of difficulty, of just irritation. And you will see God move in your life. You don't understand it right now, but you got to understand that this moment is happening on purpose. And you'll either have to choose between embracing that opportunity to hear God's voice or choosing to not look and not listen. And you can coast, this thing will pass, and you'll do your thing, and you'll move on. And that is totally up to you. It's your prerogative. But I want to encourage you that don't waste the waiting. That God has given you a reason to be here. And He has given you this season on purpose. Of all the people that have ever lived in history, He chose you to live these days. That's important. Because nothing is wasted on God. I want to encourage you in this. Use this time to seek the Lord and His will. Use this time to learn what it means to be a living sacrifice. And trust that what He's called you to do will be powerful in the future. Don't believe the lies from the enemy that says that you're not qualified for the next thing when he gives it to you. Don't believe that idiot, the devil, whenever he tells you that you're not good enough or that God has made a mistake or that somehow your trajectory is off, because it's not. Your trajectory is just right. I want to encourage you in this, all of you. I care about each of you very deeply. I want you to know that God has placed you here on purpose, for a purpose, and that even now, this sermon series that was planned out 5 months ago is proof to me that God has prepared a message for you. So be encouraged today. Be encouraged this week. Stay connected to each other. Understand that the things that God is having you go through today are going to have an impact in the future. Okay? And don't give up. Because this is so much bigger than just the stupid coronavirus. And wash your hands. Don't be dumb. What's up, everybody? This is Philip Jackson, pastor to young adults at Evergreen Church. I want to invite you to come to Reach. We meet every Tuesday evening at 6:30 at Evergreen Church, just east of Mingo on 111th Street. For more information, check out our website, reachtulsa.org. You can connect with us on social media and on Instagram by searching for reach.tulsa. Also, be sure to subscribe to our content for the latest sermons and updates. You can also find us on Spotify, iTunes, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
Bring your glory down. Come fill your people with revival sound.